So feel welcome also to turn on your camera if you feel comfortable. The recording is just for the website, so it can be used as a resource. The For Real project aims to generate new ideas in thinking, doing, and being as teachers. The idea is to create resources for educators and teachers. All of this will be done through the website. It can be found by simply typing in For Real into Google, and I will also add in the link in the chat in just a moment. And Monica will take it from here, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about our speaker today. So go ahead, Monica.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Monica Waterhouse, and I'm the Director of ESL Teacher Education at Université Laval. And I wanted to begin by acknowledging that Université Laval is situated on the ancestral territories of the following nations: the Huron-Wendat Nation, the Innu Nation, the Atikamekw Nation, the Maliseet Nation, and the Abenakis Nation. As a first-generation white settler, I'm honored to be able to participate in today's webinar from this place, and I'm thrilled that so many of you are able to join virtually from your own places and spaces around Turtle Island. With the second National Day for Truth and Reconciliation just passed on Friday, September 30th, also known as Orange Shirt Day, on which we honor residential school survivors, it's quite fitting that our first webinar in this series is entitled A Stranger on Indigenous Land, Integrating Indigenous Perspectives in Language Teaching, and our presentation is being done by Nancy Griffith Zahner. We're so thrilled to have Nancy here with us. Nancy's been a true inspiration to me personally as I try to make sense of my responsibilities with regard to the 94 calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. As a Canadian, as an ESL specialist, and as a teacher educator. Nancy and I first met in the spring of 2019 at the CASALT conference in Fredericton, where she presented a talk entitled A Change of Heart, Disrupting and Decolonizing Second Language Classroom. And her candor and her humility as she commits to decolonizing teaching practices inspired me greatly. And I've followed her work ever since. Nancy is a core French teacher. She just dashed out of class. She's been doing that for the last over 2 decades in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and she's a teacher researcher at Simon Fraser University who plans to complete her doctorate this spring in culturally inclusive place-based education. And in the past 5 years, she's worked with the Ministry of Education on developing language curricula, as well as participated in various working committees of the First Nations Education Steering Committee, which is tasked with developing and editing resources. So it goes without saying that Nancy has much to teach us, and I'm deeply honored that she accepted to join us today and support our professional learning. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you, Nancy, and without further ado, I will turn the mic over to you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay and Monica. And no event happens without some sort of snafu, be it big or small. And I'm just very impressed and heartened and grateful that we just fixed this. And that to me is the real sense of community, where we can just sort of overcome a little problem and move on, and everyone still is able to do what they want and need to do. So thank you for that. I'm very grateful for your graciousness. I will just start sharing my screen. That is not it.
I think your mic might be muted, Nancy. Oh dear. Is your mic on mute? Be sure it's activated. Oh, why did we lose your voice when you started to share your screen, I wonder?
No, it's not on mute, and yet we cannot hear Nancy.
May I suggest that Nancy leave the meeting and come back in? We had something similar happen in a meeting this afternoon.
I'm wondering, Nancy, when you came in before, it was, oh, she's gone.
Sorry, she took my advice real quickly.
I feel like the other, she came in twice with two different Nancys. I feel like the other one shared a screen.
Yeah.
If we get stuck, she should send me her PowerPoint and I can share my screen and flip through it as she speaks.
That's a good idea.
Somebody say Bing and I'll go to the next slide. Teams can be tricky like that.
Yeah, we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago about whether or not Teams was the right platform. I've had lots of difficulty with Teams before, which I suggested maybe a Zoom. I hate to pick a software, but Teams does tend to have more bugs.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, Nancy.
You know.
Okay, now I was told in a little blurb that came up when I started to share my screen that I needed permission to share the screen. Now, is that something that you need to give me, or?
I'm sorry, I don't see any space on here where it says give permission to share screen, so I'm a little concerned.
Nancy, do you see a button across the top of your toolbar that says request control?
No.
Okay,
I
if
do
you do
not.
happen to see that button, then obviously you can request control, but sometimes
Do you see my, oh, here we go. It says give control. Should I press that?
Well, now you have control, I believe, because if you can share, you have control.
Can you see?
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
it looks great.
Well,
whatever
I'm
you've
very
just done,
happy.
don't undo it. It's
I'm
looking
not doing,
great.
I touch nothing. All right, thank you for your patience. So my name is Nancy Griffith Zahner and I live in Prince Rupert, BC. I'm so happy to be here and I just am really hoping we can just move forward now without any more glitches. Just like all educators, when the Truth and Reconciliation Day came about, I wore an orange shirt and I made special efforts to buy a French shirt, Chaque enfant compte, and I made it really pretty with a feather. And I wore a pin that was an orange ribbon, and I painted a design which we had permission to paint in the front of the school with my friend Danielle. And I put up stickers and put up posters, but I had to ask myself, did I do that with the same intentions and the same visibility as when I put up my Halloween decorations, which I did on Sunday? Do I have this sign that I made in my classroom for the same reason I have that? So what I needed to ask myself is, when I am when I have visible indications of my commitment to reconciliation, is my commitment heartfelt or is it seasonal? So I'm sure that you've seen this diagram before. It was around when I went through teacher training back in the turn of the century. And the top of the iceberg, of course, represents what we see of a culture, and the what of a culture, and what's underneath is the why of the culture. And when we are being taught about how to teach about the Indus Valley, how to teach about Japanese history or any other culture's history, we can't just look at food and dress and their holidays. We also have to look at what's below the waterline. And so we could take that and apply it to our commitment to reconciliation. wearing orange shirts and putting up posters, wearing moose hide pins for Moose Hide Day, wearing red on the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Observance Day is important, joining in on district walks, and putting up decorations in the classroom. These are important, but what do they say about our actual commitment to reconciliation as opposed to how it looks? And so I'm hoping by the end of this 30-minute talk, we can add something to the bottom of that iceberg. So let's start off. Who am I exactly? We'll clarify some terms. How can we live by Indigenous principles of learning in our language classroom? And then explore lesson plan ideas. I'll tell you now that this is an hour-long presentation, but I will only take 30 minutes of your time. But there's information in here that, of course, you will get a copy of this PowerPoint, and it's very self-explanatory. I just won't read off the screen for those sections to honor your time frame. So a bit about me, and my students love drawing pictures of me, so there's me. I was born there, and I lived in Toronto for 19 years until I moved in various places, but basically I moved all the way over to Prince Rupert, British Columbia, which is just across the Hecate Strait from Haida Gwaii. There it is there on this map. I work and live on the unceded territory of the Tsimshian and Somaliac speaking people. And my crest in the Tsimshian nation is Atabis, which means the butterfly. It was a crest that was created relatively recently to encompass all non-Tsimshian people who live in Prince Rupert so that we can join in for the welcoming dance and have a crest for the potlatches that we're invited to. Prince Rupert is absolutely beautiful, and it's a huge, very important component of learning in the Indigenous fashion to have a connection to the land. And as you can see, it's not very difficult to have a connection to this land. We're right on the ocean, on an island, surrounded by mountains and forest. And of course, there's a lot of flora and fauna, both on the land and marine. And of course, there is a living and vibrant Indigenous presence in Prince Rupert. And there is Marlene Clifton, who teaches us drumming and dancing through our school district. These are just pictures taken around Prince Rupert. Here's the school I teach at, Charles Hayes Secondary School. And of course, there's a crest pole outside, and there's a lot of visual indigeneity in the class, or in the classrooms and in the school. So my classroom, and I want you to keep in mind that iceberg as I go through and very quickly show you pictures of my classroom. So I have 2 languages up on display. I have a lot of information about Haida Gwaii with French and the Haida language. A lot of French that's about Haida concepts. I teach a course on the Haida Nation. In case you're wondering why am I teaching about the Haida on Tsimshian territory, I got permission, and so here it is. I have a lot of vines and plants and shells from Haida Gwaii, driftwood, and a lot of resources about Tsimshian culture, Haida culture, and the and Indigenous cultures in general. Lots of agates and sugar agates, lots of marine stickers. There's our tea station with a picture by Wayne Edenshaw, who is a Haida artist. I bought a bunch of Haida earrings that I could never wear. They're too big, but I hang them on my plants. So if we had more time, I would ask that the group discuss, what does this classroom say about my teaching? And what we would probably come up with is, it doesn't say anything about your teaching, Nancy. It says something about how you like to decorate. Because if you're wondering if I have shells, driftwood, and Indigenous art, and agates in my house, the answer would be yes. So what does it say about my teaching? Nothing. It just says something about the ambiance that I would like to have in my home and in my classroom. So this what I've done in my classroom is all above the water, visible iceberg stuff. So how am I showing Indigenous learning in my classroom? Well, it certainly isn't from the decor. So I thought we would just quickly define the term Indigenous learning. So in order to understand the learning of a nation or any culture, you have to understand their worldview. And there's a wonderful textbook that's used here in British Columbia called BC First Nations Studies. And although you can't say that all Indigenous nations have the same worldview, they do have certain elements in common, and that is stories and oral tradition, connection to the land, spirituality as an aspect of wisdom, the role of elders and other knowledge keepers, and humor. So when I bring Indigenous learning into my classroom, it's all about learning how to learn. We start with the commonplace. We start with where students are and move from that point onward. Nature is our first teacher, so we get out onto the land as much as we possibly can. We try to have direct experience, learning by doing. We learn with the heart based on who we are, not who we should be or who other people or how other people see us. And that's important for a teacher to realize about their students. See them for who they are, not who you think they should be as learners or as people. Students need to understand why they're learning what they're learning. It should be organic. So if discussions come about and we move away from our curriculum to more of an organic curriculum for that particular day, that's perfectly fine. Students need to know that everything has a purpose in the classroom. And we need to honor and value the uniqueness of the students. That all can be found in a foreword from Learning and Teaching Together by Michelle Tanaka. The foreword is written by Greg Cayete, who is a Navajo knowledge keeper. And these are really beautiful representations of Indigenous worldview that can be used in any classroom. And there's a picture of it there. Let's take a look at some other Indigenous documents that will help us put ourselves in the right place to properly imbue Indigenous ways of knowing and content into our classroom and delve a little bit below the surface of the water to that hidden iceberg. So all the documents that I'm going to show you now have philosophies that fit into relationships, personal identity, personal pedagogy, and transformative learning. And I know I'm moving a little bit fast through here, but because you are getting a copy of this, I have no doubt you can go back and check it over. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this poster. It's called the First Peoples Principle of Learning, that was created by the First Nations Education Steering Committee and other interested parties. And I won't read out all of those principles, but this poster is in every classroom in British Columbia, in French, English, or any other language that is taught. And our BC curriculum is written with this document in mind. It is an extremely well-used, well-known document in British Columbia. And it seems to me, when I look at this, it seems that this document was written for language learning, especially that learning is holistic, reflexive, reflective, experiential, and relational. This all is 100% what language learning needs to be. But this, of course, is the basis of all of the curricula in BC, not just world languages. And this is where you can find it online. The Lillooet Nation in British Columbia also has its own set of principles of learning. And I will say that I made this poster myself because a poster doesn't exist, but the Lillooet Principles of Learning in a bullet list form is available at the website that I've quoted there. The idea of seeking spaces of stillness and valuing our own expertise and understanding that sometimes we're in a place of dissonance and uncertainty, and we were all certainly in that place earlier today and 10 minutes ago, were we not? So if we are open to the fact that things can go wrong and they are the basis of new learning and new relationships, we're in a good place. And that is an active thing that I'm working on. I'm not always cool, calm, and collected, especially if technology is not working. This is a resource from Haida Gwaii, written by Sarah Davidson with her father, the famous Haida carver Robert Davidson. She is a prof at University of British Columbia, and she feels that learning emerges from and occurs through and honors these 9 bulleted points. And I think you'll find that all of the documentation that I'm showing you, there's a lot of overlap, especially in the area of strong relationships and authentic experiences, recognizing strengths, and story. So I'm going to go through this rather quickly. Because I just wanted to show you how I have taken what I have learned and used it in my classroom. And I have done it in sort of a timeline, divided up into the start of the journey, the path winds, checking our compass, and finding our way home. And I wonder, because of course with Murphy's Law, I don't have my watch on and I can't see the clock on my computer, if someone could give me a 5-minute warning when I have 5 minutes left. That would be wonderful. So how did I use these things in my classroom? So again, at the top of the iceberg, I had the posters and student work, Indigenous teachings in French, etc. I was present, I was engaged with the students before the class started. I have tea, muffins, and a check-in in circle time before each class starts. And tlumsk is the Smalleach word, the local Indigenous language word for respect. And all levels of respect, the 5 I have listed there, are made evident and guide us throughout all of our teaching and learning in my French classroom. The path winds. And if you see the background, there's not often a lot of snow in Prince Rupert, so there we go. So the students are asked to share in the ownership of power in the classroom, so they can contribute to aspects of content and assessment, such as, here are the 4 documents that I showed you already. What I did was I typed out all of the principles and cut them into strips, such as learning takes patience and time was one of the principles from the First People's Principles of Learning. In pairs, the students would get all of these principles and they would choose which principles are important to them. We would tape them onto our whiteboard, get rid of duplicates, and then sort them into which of the 5 areas of respect for self, for others, for the learning process, for the classroom, and for the teacher, that principle that speaks to them would fall into. And then we can take those principles, such as learning takes patience and time, and create our student rules and guidelines for the classroom from that. And these are some examples of what the students came up with. And I'll let you read those over. And of course, please pipe in if you have any questions. So I took note as the kids were telling me these things. I had no difficulty in accommodating all of these requests because they were based on the principles that I try to follow from those 4 guiding documents that I showed you. And I'll continue on as I realize you will be able to look at this later. So the path winds as we continue on. The kids do lots of self-assessments all the time so they can understand why they're learning, what they're learning, how they learn, and how they can do better. And they're given as much time as they need in class to learn and then to teach others, one-on-one or leading the class or leading a group. And always, and I know that you do this too, all of the French is contextual, using real life situations, not just they know their colors, they know their numbers, and they know their farm animals, but there's no way to connect them in sentences. And we're outside as much as possible with an elder if possible. And of course, we speak English when we're with the elder, but before we go with the elder, we discuss it in French, and then afterwards, we discuss in French what we learned from the elder. And they are encouraged to embrace the difficulty of learning another language as a necessary part of learning. And checking our compass, they are always given all of the criteria and the rubrics ahead of time, including practice tests. They can have a friend beside them when they do their oral presentations to give them confidence. They always have the option of redoing the entirety or part of a project or test. And they talk after we do the marking and they get their things back. They discuss what methods did or didn't work for them. And that helps them and the class. So that we always feel that we're working together as a team rather than I'm assessing you, you are being assessed, and those are our roles, and those roles never change. There's much more formative than summative assessment, much more learning how to learn as opposed to me marking and putting in the mark book. So sometimes formative that looks like summative, like we'll do little practice tests that only count for learning, they don't count for marks. And they're also assessed on much more than their academics. And they know ahead of time and it matches with the BC curriculum. The term ends, they have input into areas of their marks so they can value their own expertise. So the ratio of tests to projects, how to deal with lower grades, playful competition all the way through. I've sort of gamified the classroom so that everyone feels it's fun, and they also feel there's a little bit of humor, and there's lots of ways to earn points. The parents receive a lot of information, including a special end of term email from me praising the accomplishments of their child, and then there's an elder invited to an end of term party. Tanaka says, Indigenous worldviews embrace the idea that complexity, such as that found in educational settings, is about relationships more than things. We exist only in relationship, and our actions always affect the complex web of existence in which we are embedded. So relationships is the most important thing in education, as I'm sure you already know. So as I mentioned earlier, we have curriculum as planned, which is important, our intentions as per our provincial curriculum, but also the curriculum as the experience of our classroom dictates. Okay, so we have our intentions, but then actually what happened. And I think to find the beautiful ethical third space where those two circles overlap is where all the magic takes place. The zone of between, as it's called with curricular knowledge keepers. And this is the tensionality in which all teachers dwell, which accommodates the value of student voice, advocacy, and accountability, and puts students at the center of their own learning. So I never feel bad if I go off script. I guess it depends on why I go off script. It should be relevant to the learning, but if it's off script, that doesn't mean good learning isn't happening. And it values learning skills rather than content, which is at the heart of the BC curriculum. I'm not sure about the Quebec and Ontario curricula. And the same magical ethical space occurs when Indigenous ways of knowing and learning overlap with Western ways of knowing and learning, because no one is suggesting that we get rid of our Western ways, simply that we find a nice métissage between the two. So I'm going to move through this wonderful gentleman, Michael Nikolakalanis, and who is a very great example of finding that ethical third space and about balancing content and theory. So here's an example of indigenizing a unit, the family. So the first thing I do when I have a unit about the family, I would have all the things that anyone would have in a unit about the family. Voici mon arbre généalogique, combien de personnes y a-t-il dans ma famille? Dans ma famille, il y a 10 personnes. Voici mon père, ma mère, etc. So, but I would take that lesson plan and I would take it to my district's Indigenous Education Department and ask them to put me in touch with people who could help me imbue that unit with Indigenous content. Okay, so what can I learn to do and what must an elder or knowledge keeper teach? So what can I just teach on my own with Indigenous content, and what do I need to bring an elder in to teach so I'm not appropriating? Okay, so here is the unit, and I use vocab to describe members of the family, etc., etc. And at the beginning, when I was first teaching, I had no Indigenous focus whatsoever. The questions I would ask would be these. And it's important. I'm not just putting in content with a crowbar to say that I've done it, which is how I used to do it a decade ago. I didn't know how to do it and no one taught me. They just told me I needed to start. And so I needed to have a shift in my own heart about why I was incorporating indigeneity into my classroom, as well as ways of learning, not just content. So how does the idea of identity shift? Can I bring in any of the local language, etc., etc.? So this is what I was told to do, starting with the commonplace. And you'll see that these are principles that we talked about earlier in this presentation. You start with the commonplace, which is family. We learn through our direct experiences with their families and with our elder, learning from the heart. So emphasize a sense of pride and belonging. I'm not sure if you guys were taught when you were going through your teacher training, if you're teachers, I'm not sure 100% of my audience, that if you're teaching a family tree, you should never encourage students to use their own families in case they were ashamed of their family situation. And I was taught that back 20 years ago. And I think that is such a wrong way to be thinking of it. That's saying to kids, there is something to be ashamed of if your family doesn't look like mother, father, sister, brother. So students should be taught pride in whatever their family is about. And that starts with teaching the vocabulary for foster families, for stepbrothers and sisters, for adoption, and bringing it into quote unquote normal. We don't want to other our students. And so recognizing the uniqueness of every child and a place of pride, a sense of pride and belonging is right from the Indigenous concepts that we've been talking about. Okay, so everything having a purpose. Why are we studying using some Somaliac terms? Why are we studying about crests being matrilineal in the family? Because we're in Prince Rupert. We're on unceded Indigenous land. Where else would you be doing this if not here? And finding a comfort in place of dissonance, finding pride in their family structures or in individual members of the family, even though you weren't told that you should be proud of a particular situation. So the way I got myself into the right space is that I actually went to Somaliac culture and language classes every Tuesday evening. I learned, which is the top document, how to create a family tree using the local language, Somaliac, for my particular family. I learned what our crests were in Somaliac and, of course, in French. And then I learned how to say that I am a guest on the non-ceded territories of the Tsimshian Nation and Somaliac speaking people. And that's what I teach my students, that they need to say at the beginning of every presentation, but not just that, but why we're learning that. Why we need to acknowledge that we're on Indigenous land, what that means. It's not just I'm taking something and I'm saying, thank you, I'm taking this from you, and then thinking that that's enough of an acknowledgement. So there is the family tree. There are the crests, Lakibu, Gitswudwada, Laskich, and Ganhada. So this is something that we would learn. Je suis Adebis, le papillon. So that's incorporating just a touch of the local language Somaliac into French. And there is the what we would say. And then we would learn about how the crests are matrilineal. Je suis Lakibu parce que ma mère est Lakibu. I am wolf because my mother is wolf. Mon père est Gitswudwada, mais je ne suis pas Gitswudwada. My father is killer whale, but I am not killer whale because the crests go through the mother. So this is just brought right into our French. And you see that we are using all the structures, all the grammar and the verbs that we were supposed to be using. It's the content is different, and it's content with intent. It's not just I'm choosing something other than Fifi and her poodle and her croissant. There is a reason why we're doing this content. So we do little activities based, a family tree based on masks. We have our elder in to show off our learning when we do our presentations, and that woman beside our elder, Samoyget Girchan, is our elder, and that was our principal at the time of that I took this picture, Sandra Pond. So all of my units I took to our Indigenous education department, and they helped me bring an Indigenous focus into all of these units. And I'll let you look at the art unit on your own time. I'm sure I'm getting close to my 30 minutes. But this was an interesting one because the art was originally all European art. And it was very easy to see how I would indigenize that. But I can't teach Indigenous art. I am not Indigenous, and I'm certainly not an artist. So I asked if we could bring in an Indigenous artist. And so here is Lucy Trimble, and she taught us how to do Gana, which is frog in her language. She's not Jimsen, she's Gitsan. And she taught us how to draw it. We all drew it. So we saw Ganao, which is the Gitsan word for frog, and it's the animal, not the crest. So we weren't drawing her crest, just a frog. And Grenille, of course, is the French. And there's the finished product. They could put anything that's important to them on their either gluing or drawing, our medicines. And this is what they would say, and I'll let you read that. I'm not reading that all out to you. And it would, of course, be from the heart. It wouldn't be read from a piece of paper. And there are some of the work. Someone put a cup of coffee. They're after my own heart. Very wide range of artistic talent. I wasn't marking them on their art. I was marking on their speech from the heart, not only using our art vocabulary, but also talking about what it means to them to be drawing an Indigenous design. And I asked them, a lot of them had brothers and sisters who were in my class, who learned about Van Gogh, about Manet and Monet, about realism, impressionism, post-impressionism. And I asked them, did you wonder why we didn't do the art that your older brothers and sisters did? And this is what they said. I was very impressed. And in fact, indeed, if you're not learning about your local Indigenous culture and nation on your land, where are you going to learn about them? Where are you going to learn about the Tsimshian people if not on their land? And I said, do you wish we'd done artists like Van Gogh? Because Van Gogh is a very cool story and his art is beautiful. We painted form lines and different elements of Indigenous art. Do you think that we were guilty of appropriation? And again, if I had more time and I understood teams better, we'd have a discussion. But the answer was no, because we are allowed to copy form lines that have been created for educational purposes. And we are allowed to use them in our classroom as long as we are not selling the art and making a profit of it or using it to pretend that we are Indigenous. And of course, we can't change anything about the form lines. This is a resource that I'm very pleased to share with you, and I got permission that will explain to educators such as myself what appropriation is and isn't. And I have some resources here, but I'm afraid that a lot of them would be local to British Columbia, but a lot of them are online, and I'm very pleased to share them with you. They're excellent, excellent resources, and they're all explained here quite well. Of course, salmon is huge in Prince Rupert and all along the coast. You may not find it quite as interesting. And this is about finesse, which we mentioned earlier. It's excellent resources, and I'm sorry I'm going through so fast, but this is an English magazine, but once in a while there's something in French. And plus I can read articles and summarize them in French. All right, so here we are back at our diagram. And what I'm hoping is, and if you have questions and have time, we can discuss it when I stop sharing, but what could we write now about what is underneath the water? You know, we have what we can see with our eyes, but what could we write about what's underneath? Thank you very much for that speedy and stress-filled presentation. And I just need to figure out how to stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Nancy. I think everyone is
There we go.
showing their appreciation with our various reactions and applause. Fascinating. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have 15 minutes or so for questions and comments from. I have like 1,000, but of course,
Okay.
but I'll let others talk.
Can you hear me? Good. Would you like me to just, we could have a very brief discussion on what goes underneath the water for the iceberg, or I could just tell you if you're a little more pressed for time. I'll leave it up to you guys. Discuss or give the answers right away.
I think that we can maybe discuss as a large group,
Sure.
since there's only 11 of us.
Okay, so we know that wearing our orange shirts, and please don't misunderstand, I'm not criticizing. I do all the things above the iceberg. And in our school, because there's the Indigenous population, is the largest demographic in Prince Rupert and in our school. Second is students of Asian descent, and third is students of European descent. So I wouldn't dream of not participating on a visual level with all of these different things. But underneath the surface, what are some things you think that would show that we understand why we're doing what we're doing?
I think Philippa has her hand up. Do you wanna pitch something there?
Sure, I was that kid in school, always in the front row with my hand up, super excited. I just really quickly how much I really love this presentation. I know you were rushed through and technical difficulties, but I was sitting there going the whole way through.
Oh my goodness, thank you so
you.
much.
I think underneath, so in answer to your question, my response would be under the iceberg, it really feels like so much of it is relational in our approach with the students and the way we structure our teaching and really putting them in the center and caring about them and really putting their learning first ahead of things like grades, their interests, and giving them support and feedback and really just caring about bringing them forward. That was what I took away from it, what I'm starting to learn about Indigenous teaching and learning practices, which I know nothing about. Nothing.
Philippa, I think that was so astute. That was very moving, actually, and inspirational. I completely agree with you that below the iceberg is relationality and putting students first, always, minute by minute, day by day, and listening to them and truly listening to them and getting to know them really well and developing the relationships that sometimes mean that maybe you're going to go to their hockey practices, maybe you're going to go to their dance recitals, so that you have some commonality outside of the classroom. Because not all of my students are great in French or even like French, but that doesn't mean that we, the student and I, can't have a very positive relationship based on respect, patience, and of course other concepts that might pop up. I think Monica has her hand up.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me too, I mean, we're talking about underneath the iceberg as if it's sort of, and I think one of the things that is a bit scary for non-Indigenous educators is that we don't understand that under the iceberg. And certainly British Columbia, I think is, and in Prince Rupert, you are far more deeply steeped in this than we are. So we're taking our first tentative steps. I mean, when you were talking about your experience 10 years ago, I think I feel like that's where we're sitting now. And we're trying to take these first steps. So we're nervous about that. But then you had those beautiful Venn diagrams showing the overlap. And it seems to me, picking up on what Philippa said, that a lot of these fundamental relational values in education and what language education can be about are not so different. These are not unfamiliar to us, the basic principles underlying the learning the principles of learning in the Indigenous ways worldview.
Mm-hmm. You are 1000% correct. And I'm sorry that I didn't highlight that more. I should have said, you are probably already doing 100% of what you need to be doing as far as where your heart is with language teaching, be it ESL, FSL, or any other language, because you do put the students first, and it is contextually based language. You're not just learning little dribs and drabs that aren't connected. It's very relational. There's always a lot of respect for the students and great relations between the students and the teacher. Where we can go from there is to be actively thinking. An Indigenous knowledge keeper, if they came into my classroom, let's say their grandchild was in my French classroom, which has happened, would they be happy with how I'm teaching French to their Tsimshian grandchild? And do we get out onto the land and try to develop a personal relationship to the land and use the land as a vehicle and a teacher through which we are learning French? Are we learning with humor? Are we learning through storytelling? Are we learning by allowing students to also teach other people? Do we give second, third, fourth, and fifth chances? Or are we forced to be steeped in the Western idea, and this would be forced by your admin or your district, of here's the test, you have to have the report card done by this day, and when parent-teacher interviews come, then the parent wants to see, here's the test that they wrote, here's the project mark that they got, here's how they can get an A, which is not an Indigenous way of teaching. A more Indigenous way of teaching is, watch me do this thing. Okay, now you try. Oops, let's try it again. Oh, that's funny, you did. Let's try it a different way. You show me now how you do it. Oh, you've mastered it. Can you show Fred? That's the way to go. So even in failing, the student has pride in what they're doing, which is not part of the Western paradigm. So you are already doing what would make a knowledge keeper and an elder proud. But where we can all move forward is, are we purposefully and with intent recognizing the indigeneity of the land as we are teaching?
If I could jump in really quick, I know you're situated in BC, so you've shared a lot of the resources that you have there and some of the general texts, the one from Tanaka, Teaching and Learning Together, etc., which are super useful. But I wanted to also share in the chat there our own, here in Quebec, we also have a First Nations Education Council situated in Quebec, and I'm not sure, I'm learning too, I don't know the full scope of their presence and resources they can offer us, but they certainly on their website have a number of resources available in French and English. So those of us situated in Quebec, I encourage you to check that out as maybe a point of departure after we leave today, so that while we have those wonderful resources from Nancy out on the West Coast, it's here in Quebec as well, as we slowly learn to integrate this in our own educational practices here.
You have a distinct advantage over teachers like myself in BC who are on the journey to indigenize their French classroom, in that your First Nations Education Steering Committee, whatever it is called in Quebec, obviously has French as a priority. Our First Nations Education Steering Committee has not translated any of their materials into French and won't let me do it either. And I don't question that. It's not my place to question why they won't allow a further level of colonizing language on their work. But I've been told, quote unquote, French isn't even on our radar, Nancy. And I'm like, all right, fair enough. So if I were in Quebec, and there are other stressors. There are other, situations going on in Quebec. And we have problems that are specific to BC. You have some that might be specific to Quebec and so on. But one problem that you do not have is the commitment that your First Nations education departments have to French. And that is a blessing. And I'm really hoping that you're getting the support you need from not only your own administrators, but your district and also your steering committee provincially. I bet you they've got some wonderful things. I'm going to look up their website when we're finished.
Yes. Well, we're in an interesting moment too, which maybe we won't all get into, but we've recently had this year the passing of Bill 96, which is has implications for language education in the province of Quebec. And we also had an election yesterday, and so the government, the CAC that originally brought through that new Bill 96 will be staying with us for the this foreseeable future. Then they've just gotten another mandate. So yeah, Nancy, we'll keep in touch. The winds of change are blowing and interesting things are always afoot for us as language educators in Quebec.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. I wonder, Nancy, could you comment a little bit about this notion of plurilingualism? Because I know plurilingual pedagogies are getting a bit of traction, particularly when we look at immigrant education across Canada. But I can see it in your work with French, with English, with the local Indigenous language. Any thoughts around plurilingual pedagogies and the importance of that and the way it works in your language teaching?
Well, I must start off by saying I am not an expert in any way in plurilinguistic pedagogy. I would not expect that my students speak more than French in my classroom. But as I mentioned earlier, the second largest demographic in Prince Rupert is people of Asian descent. And there is a vibrant set of communities in Prince Rupert that are filled with people who've immigrated and speak their language as their first language. And some of my students speak Vietnamese or Tagalog or Chinese as their first language, and their English is heavily accented. So I am still working on strategies to help students who have French as a third or fourth or fifth language, especially if their other languages are Asian languages, because I don't have the expertise to form connections between them. If it was Spanish or Italian or German, I would be able to say, just as in German you have this, it's this in French, or like I can with English if need be. So I can't really comment with any authority on any strategies for plurilinguistics. I just use the same levels of patience and give and take that I do with students who are unilingual and who sometimes are fighting the idea of speaking French. So I'm sorry, I can't really speak to that to your satisfaction.
No, not at all. That was perfect. I thought it was so interesting to see them in practice. I'm just watching the chat. There's some thanks coming out from Cynthia, and I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Cynthia. To Nick, it's a thank you.
Oh, it's
Thank you very much.
Xiaowank.
Xiaowank, thanks. And are there questions or comments from the remaining participants? Oh, I think Sunny has her hand up. I'm sorry, I just noticed.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Sunny. You said you weren't sure if you were going to make it, and I'm so happy you're here.
Yes, and I can't have my video on because I think the connection is not great here. But thank you so much. I managed to come in, and I guess it's the time difference. Is that right?
Yes.
That is pushed to, okay. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No. It's we can laugh about it now.
Right. Okay. But I caught the rest, the second half of the talk, and thank you so much. I actually had the question about appropriation,
Mhm.
but you have the resources there, so I'm going to look them up because I think that is my first concern also. Always wonder if we do something wrong, and we don't want to do that, and we want to make it like do it in a respectful way. And I'm now in Kuujjuaq, and I've
Mhm.
been in the past 2 days working with the pedagogical counselors here who are working in the Inuit community, teaching English, French, and Inuktitut. And
Mhm.
one of the questions that they have is, well, definitely they are very interested in making links among languages.
Mhm.
And sometimes we don't have to know the language in order to make links, because we can invite students to tell us, to share, even though it may not be correct. But then the question itself raised their awareness. It's a step to recognizing that they have the resources, and also to push them to think about the language also, and how it is different or similar to the language that they are learning. I just want to add that, but definitely there's also the concern that because of the dominance of English here also and French, there is also the pushback in terms of how do we teach Indigenous languages, how do we protect it so that it can be it can survive and thrive, it can be preserved.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you have any insights on this.
Well, I will say that I was teaching a boy last year, Avel from the Philippines, and he was put into my grade 10 French class, which is supposed to be the 6th year of French, and he hadn't done any French at all, and not word one. And he said, "Could you let me stay? And maybe you could change things around." And what I heard through my teacher lens was, "Can you adapt? Not modify, but adapt." And I said, "Absolutely." So we had it be oral work for him with just this very small amount of written. But he needed to learn how to count to 10. And I said, um, how about if you put the numbers in Tagalog on the board from 0 to 10, and I'll write the words in French for you. And not only did that make him feel right at home, but it showed me when I saw the Tagalog words, and I'm looking at them and they are very foreign to me, no pun intended, it made me realize how hard it is for him, because it put me in his shoes. And the two of us became co-learners. And he didn't take French this year. And I recommended that maybe he not, because it was really, really hard for him. But anyway, we're still best buddies. He still comes into my room all the time to get snacks. So I completely agree that to try to find links between the languages is very important, and not just between the languages, but between how the language represents culture, because there is no culture without language, and there's no language without culture. And so, for example, in the family unit, it's not just that we learn how to say mother or father in Somaliac, and I can't test them on the Somaliac because it's not in my French curriculum to test them on how to say mother and father in Somaliac. But what we can do is discuss in French the matrilineal aspect of crests. So in that way, we can find links between our Canadian cultural view of what a family is, which must include every deviation of family we can think of, and a traditional Tsimshian family, which might have much more emphasis on the aunts and the grandmothers, and what the father traditionally brings into the family, as far as traditions and crests and knowledge goes, and what the mother brings in. So that can all be discussed in French. So, but as for making direct links, yes, that's something I'm very interested in pursuing further. As I get more knowledgeable with other languages and meet more kids who have other first languages than English. Thank you for that, Sunny. That was great.
thank you, Nancy. Thank you for sharing that example about the Filipino student. And I really like the idea of, opening up the classroom and you co-learn languages with students. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
I just wanted to say, I think that's so important, the idea that we're learners too. I know Nancy already underscored sort of flattening those hierarchical relationships between who's the teacher, who's the learner, and the knower, and the student, and the fact that indeed she's committed, Nancy committed to taking that Tuesday night class. And I know I spent some time this afternoon making sure I could pronounce the names of the local Indigenous peoples here at U Laval, listening to an audio recording of Michelle Odette, our representative here at U Laval, and these are important. These count. Certainly, though, there are wonderful language revitalization projects going around. In Prince Rupert, do the students at your school, are they able to take some classes in their local language as well?
You will be very happy to hear that our Tsimshian Smalliach Language Authority, which is a committee made up of elders and knowledge keepers, have battled away for years to have Smalliach language learning and culture learning be an integrated part of the curriculum. And the end result of that is that Smalliach language and culture is mandatory from kindergarten to grade 4. All students get it. And then from grade 5 onward, the students can choose, do they want to stay in Smalliach or would they like to go to French? Smalliach is offered at the middle school, so 6, 7, and 8, and at the high school. And these are district approved, locally created curricula. And there are lots of those types of curricula throughout the province, because we don't want people in Victoria creating a curriculum for the Smalliach language. We want local people to do that. And it took years, much blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of fighting on the part of those elders. But now all the cool stuff takes place in the Smalliach classroom. And I am constantly collaborating with our Smalliach teacher. And she teaches us so much, which we translate into French when we get back. We have harvested berries. We have harvested plants that can be made into tea. You can also strip their bark and dry the stalk, and it turns, and you can cut them into beads and wear them as beads. And it has deep cultural significance to the Tsimshian people. It's not just, plastic beads like for jewelry. And she is so generous and gracious in allowing us to be part of this. And there's, in my opinion, a very visible example of reconciliation. I've said, will you forgive me for teaching a language of colonization on your territory? Metaphorically, I haven't asked her that specifically. And she says, yes, let me help you teach it better. And so she teaches me how to use the land in my French class. And she teaches me what a Tsimshian elder or knowledge keeper would want French students to learn. So I am so grateful to her. I tell her that every day.
That's extraordinary. That is such a hopeful and wonderful note. I'm wondering if that is perhaps an excellent spot for us to pause as we we can feel hopeful that we can continue on our journey towards reconciliation in a very different place maybe than where you're at, Nancy, but you've definitely, I think, inspired all of us to look at our own practices and our own journey ahead in a different way. I'm not sure if my colleagues from Bishops and Sherbrooke want to make a final comment. I know that in the chat, Sunny has confirmed that the recording will be available soon, the web link's there. And in addition, I think we'll coordinate with Nancy and maybe we can get some of, if not her presentation slides, at least some of her references and share those there as well, because I know you're interested in following up.
Absolutely.
Any final comments from our colleagues or our guests? Well, thanks to everyone. Thanks to Trevor and his technological prowess and for the support of the whole team. And thanks most of all to you, Nancy. I think that was an extraordinary way to launch our webinar series, and we look forward to future news from you and your journeys.
Well, thank you for your grace and patience as we got off with a hilarious start to this series. But first attempt in learning, that's what FAIL stands for. So I guess we're living what we were preaching. Thank you very much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
It was wonderful. Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Nancy.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much, Monica, too.
Oh, of course, it was such a thrill. And perhaps...
Oh, we lost you.
Sorry, I hit my mute mic. Do we have to stop the recording in some fashion?